Hi, everyone, and welcome to our October Canada Wildfire webinar. My name is Karen, and I'm really excited to host this session today. Today, we're going to be joined by Landon Shepherd. He's the Fire and Vegetation Specialist with Jasper National Park, and he's going to be talking to us about the Jasper Wildfire Complex, insights from the first 2 weeks. I'm really excited to have this session to hear more. I think a lot of us, this fire hit not just people in Canada or in Alberta, but people across the world. It had a real impact on them emotionally. It's an iconic place that experienced fire. And I think with that comes great opportunity to share a bit about the science of fire and fire behavior, ignitions, changes in climate, things like that. So I'm really excited to have Landon here. Landon, I'm going to hand the presentation over to you. As you're presenting, if anyone has questions come up, please pop them in the chat box. If anything's critical, I'll interrupt Landon and we'll field them right away. If not, we will save them to the end when we'll have a live question and answer period. So Landon, welcome. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thanks, Karen, and thanks for your patience with my struggles with the technology this morning.
No worries. I'm going to hand it off to you to go ahead with your presentation. Thanks, Landon.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone, and appreciate the opportunity to present this morning. And thanks for that intro, Karen. Yeah, I totally agree that these incidents, especially when so many people are able to emotionally connect with an incident and the effects of the incident, are really powerful and hopefully get leverage so that we learn as much as possible to help the next community that may be challenged, and particularly communities that might not be able to garner so much attention, that less people have had the chance to form those emotional connections with. So I am pleased to be giving this presentation. I'm limited to an hour, so I'm going to do my best to try and push through, but I suspect I'll go a little bit over, and I am definitely leaving a bunch of elements out on this presentation because it is a big topic. My background: I'm a 33-year firefighter. I've been involved in a number of different roles throughout my career, and last year, 2024 in Jasper was one of my first roles as incident commander on a large and complex incident, but certainly will be one that will stick with me because of that incident. Not just because of the complexity, but also Jasper is home for me and has been for over 30 years. So it certainly resonated on both a professional and a personal level. So the Jasper wildfire. Let's see if I can advance things. For those joining us from further away and who maybe aren't as familiar with Jasper's location, we're one of the Rocky Mountain National Parks, and we sit on the height of land and near the continental divide between Alberta and British Columbia, and we share a lot of characteristics with the mountain ranges to the west of us, and we also share some of the weather elements to the east of us with Alberta. We're a relatively dry location. We're in a subsidence zone, and we tend to have quite dry summers as a rule, and certainly 2024, the month of July, was meeting that criteria. I'll just point out the locations where the various fires started. The North Fire, just north of the community, less than 5 kilometers from the community, and then the series of 3 fires started by lightning upwards of a little over 30 kilometers south of the community. So what was the context as we headed into July? I mentioned that we're a fairly dry area, but July ended up being unusually dry for us. We hadn't had a very wet winter, and that was not unique to us. Indeed, following the 2023 wildfire season, as many of you will know, there were a number of fires that overwintered in northern Alberta and northeastern British Columbia and in the Northwest Territories. And so Alberta in particular had to start up quite early with their suppression work. They were engaged, I believe, as early as February, working on some fairly active fires, and that carried through all the way through the fire season. By July, they had done so many rotations with their incident management personnel and fire crews, and they had so many demands on organizations. All the organizations in Canada after 2023 were already quite tired and exhausted for good reason with that record fire season. And unfortunately for Alberta, with that early start, they weren't able to get the recovery that they would have otherwise liked to reset. And so by mid-July, they were extending offers through or requests through CIFSI to try and get assistance, both as incident management teams and for firefighting personnel. And CIFSI was requesting external to Canada because we weren't able to meet those needs. And indeed, all of the area around Jasper in British Columbia and in Alberta was quite hot, dry, and active. So by July 10th, we had gone into extreme. And just to give context, over the last 5 years, on average, we would reach values that put us in extreme fire danger only about 4 days per year. But obviously, this stretch of 14 days in extreme was quite unusual, and indeed approaches record values at our main weather station in terms of the overall dryness. At least DMC BUI values are in that category. And we are obviously partners with CIFSI, and we rely on the support of our partners in the West, quite often from the generous help from British Columbia and Alberta. And so we were definitely keen to try and support Alberta, and we sent an incident management team up to the Saskatchewan complex, which was the number one priority wildfire due to the number of people displaced at that time. Shortly after that deployment, we had a couple lightning-caused wildfires. You can see the sort of day after they've received some initial work from crews and bucketing, both high tree line locations, classic lightning start fires in Jasper National Park. Most of our lightning strikes tend to hit rock and ice up above vegetation, but we had a couple starts as the storm passed through with no significant precipitation relief when those systems moved through. July 19th, we ended up implementing a backcountry travel ban to restrict the numbers of people in this fairly remote hiking area that would be difficult to evacuate if we were to see extreme fire behavior. And on the 20th, we had another lightning strike where we were fortunate. We had a couple helicopters that were returning from Utopia that were able to action that wildfire, which was up near Moline Lake, and quickly shut it down. But it was concerning. The ignition was quite easy. We were getting these ignitions up at high elevation where fuels do tend to be a little wetter. And fortunately for us, where we have less values at risk, but it became apparent that given how quickly things were likely to develop, that if we had ignitions in the lower valley bottom, the fires would likely get large quite quickly. The morning of July 22nd, there were wildfires all around us. So aside from the small ones that were in Jasper, there were large wildfires in Alberta lands. There was ones in BC that had nearby communities on evacuation alert. There was a fire just north of the park that was crossing from BC into Alberta that was going to be challenging for the two agencies to figure out how to co-manage. There was a lot going on, and my incident management team was on deck and expecting we might need to respond. And it was feeling increasingly likely we'd had a remote, slightly larger wildfire start down in Yoho National Park. It was still a ways away from the Trans-Canada Highway, but a bit concerning that way. But it started to feel like we were due for a significant incident just with what was going on all around us. And so perhaps not too surprising in many ways, a bit of an expected stressful event is that a fire did start. So we got the first report. The fire looked maybe just a tiny bit smaller than this. The first report that came into Jasper Dispatch was 2 minutes after 7 on July 22nd. In the image, you can see this fire started just underneath this power transmission line pole near what's known as the Jasper Waste Transfer Station. And so just to the north of that station, underneath the line, which became a bit problematic because not only did the fire pretty rapidly spread, but it was in relatively light fuels initially, and we actually had a good feeling that we might be able to quickly contain it. This is about 7 minutes after the first duty officer arrived on scene. He arrived within 4 minutes because it's just down the road from our park's compound. And what became the problem was that power line. We weren't able to spray water because the fire initially advanced right underneath the line. So with risk of electrocution being quite real, that's the electricity that flows into the community of Jasper. Both the ground crews and the helicopter that were limited. So the helicopter couldn't drop water that would cause a connection between the bucket and the helicopter and through the lines into the ground. So needing to drop from quite high to make sure there was that separation of the water from the bucket. So made it difficult to be effective, and the winds certainly appreciated that, and the fire rapidly grew. I'll just give a picture. This is sort of, I think it was about an hour on, but as you can see, lighter fuels, but that just allowed it to be able to move along quickly. At nearly the same time, so at 5 minutes after 7, 6 minutes after 7, and 8 minutes after 7, there was a series of lightning strikes in the south of Jasper, right near the edge of our cell phone range. So unlike a lot of incidents where you get immediately reported incidents through photos and not just phone calls, this one came in as a phone call about 10 minutes after 7 p.m. that there'd been a fire spotted. And this fire and this photo was taken 6 minutes after the ignition strike. And you can see with the winds from the cell passage in the foreground with the deciduous vegetation getting moved. And that there's significant winds feeding this, and the fire blew up obviously rather quickly. So that was 6 minutes after ignition, and only 5 minutes after ignition, that same individual had taken this little clip of video. You can see to the south of the strikes, there'd been a little bit of precip associated with the cell passage, but there was not really any water present on the roads at about the fire's location and all parts north. But yeah, within 5 minutes, it's starting to crown, and this is 17 minutes later, where it has absolutely compromised the South Highway out of Jasper and blocked this off as an egress route. So just to give you a sense of these things all happening pretty simultaneously, the North Fire has blocked off the Highway 16 route that leads towards Hinton, that's in the Edmonton area. It rapidly went across the highway. We were having quite busy summer traffic that you can picture semi trucks trying to frantically back up and jackknife with no great places to turn around. First responders having to switch quickly from trying to suppress the fire to trying to keep people safe and out of harm's way from this rapidly moving fire. And then down south, where we have very limited communications and have quite a difficulty getting a strong sense of what exactly is happening to the south of the community, we get a report of not just one, but potentially multiple fires that are also happening south of the community. And this is a very busy, it's a very busy place, Jasper. We had over 2.5 million visitors a year. It's the middle of the summer, which is when we tend to have the most people coming to enjoy the park. And that meant that there was a lot of people that needed to be removed from harm's way and evacuated from campgrounds, day use areas, trails, a lot of things happening. And so you have the immediate highway risk and threat, and then you also have where people have settled down and expected to be camping. So that was quite a challenge, and I think it was well published that we were successful. We got people out of 4 major campgrounds very quickly. We cleared a number of day use areas and other smaller campgrounds as well. We then had to initiate our in Unified Command. We initiated an evacuation alert and very shortly after, evacuation order for the community, and proceeded to facilitate getting about 25,000 people out of the park. And just a note on that thought process. The North Fire alone was too close for comfort. We had potential and indeed experienced some north winds overnight from the 22nd into the 23rd. So having a significant wildfire perched less than 5 kilometers away from the community would be arguably enough reason to evacuate. Having the 3 fires south of the community that are being so active, starting to compromise a number of different values at risk, and the combination of blocking 2 out of our 3 means of egress, and the unsettled weather that was happening on the 22nd made it so that it was the only real call. We couldn't afford to wait to maybe lose our only other egress route out of the community, we wouldn't be able to keep people safe. So there wasn't much hesitation in terms of making the decision that we needed to get people out. And then a bunch of other things are happening. So while we're, trying to bucket the North Fire, initially got most of the suppression resources. We reallocated some resources to the South fires, but they were only able, of course, to be effective at the backs of the most southerly, at the back of the most southerly fire. It did help slow the progression there, but had zero impact on the fires. I remember reading somewhere that if we dispatched quickly a crew in a helicopter to the South fires, we might have caught them in the first half hour. We wouldn't have caught them in the first 5 minutes. When you look at that photo of what the fire blew up to and how quickly it did, and bear in mind that was one of 3 fires, and it was the middle-sized one of those 3 fires, so it wasn't even the most active one. Really pretty obvious choice. And that same night as the evacuation, we had unified command with the community of Jasper, the municipality of Jasper and Parks Canada working on evacuation. And then the wildfire response and the municipal fire response were working not in formal unified command that night, but working on gathering resources and putting up sprinkler systems on some of our most critical infrastructure. And so then that work continued into the 23rd. You can see in some of these photos of getting people and resources, fuel, personnel, getting people briefed and oriented, and with limited ability to affect any of the unfavorable spread directions on these wildfires. The heads of the wildfires were far too active for direct suppression by any ground personnel, and even from our heavy lift helicopter that Alberta had sent over right away. We were having some effect on the flanks of the North Fire, but the air tankers that were able to arrive on the 23rd. And to be clear, we of course requested them on the 22nd, but they weren't available in either BC or Alberta to assist. They were already busily engaged either with other communities or were grounded due to weather or smoke and couldn't come late in the evening to assist. But on the 23rd, they did assist, but were absolutely ineffective, even on the flanks of the wildfires south of the community. So it became a matter of trying to remove fuels, trying to do sort of last minute FireSmart, setting up sprinkler systems, both around the perimeter of the west end of the community, as well as on critical infrastructure like the hospital and senior center you see here. And like I said, huge amount of work went into trying to pull items away from structures to give those structures a better chance of weathering an ember event. So still on the 23rd, this is fire behavior mid-afternoon as it's advancing primarily on the east side of the South Highway, the east side of the Athabasca River. That was the bulk of the fire growth was on that side of the valley on the 23rd. This is the view from town, as you can imagine. Pretty sobering, pretty frightening, really, even for very experienced wildland firefighters. But you can imagine for urban firefighting personnel, for some of the essential services that are helping with utilities and other required duties for battening down the community. It was quite terrifying for them, and people were not sleeping. It was quite a stressful sort of period. At this time, the fire behavior forecast was still that the fire would reach town by Friday, but that we would see precip relief the Wednesday night through Thursday morning. So there was quite a bit of hope, not unrealistic hope. Just it was just that it was just hope that that would indeed prove to be the case, and that we wouldn't get a strong growth from this fire on the 24th. Just a brief clip of that line of fire up towards Takara Mountain that you saw in the previous image. This is what that looks like. So is that how things played out on the 24th? Obviously not. So what happened? Well, there's a whole bunch of work that's gone into looking at this, and what I think all of the folks that have been looking at the behavior agree on is that it moved into that fire behavior that is very difficult to model, forecast, and predict. And there's a bunch of positive feedback mechanisms that help the fire to achieve things that models are not going to account for, including the rapid spread, the level of fire intensity, and the end result. So the 24th started as a pretty stable atmosphere relatively, and there was an inversion in place early in the morning. The fire actually took a few hours to pick up and start to punch through that weak inversion, and then to start to draw. And then early afternoon, we had a series of different runs by the fire that were a colleague, Dan Parakis, calls them plume driven. I'm more familiar with calling them column driven, but essentially a centralized heat pump forms from the fire. And in mountainous terrain like this, where you've got different wind speeds and directions at different elevations, you can get rotation starting to form with that upward convective lift. And in the case of the 24th, it became supercharged in many ways. You can see in this bottom right photo, these indrafts from the fire on the east side of the valley over to the west. That's a distance of like 5 kilometers, where it is pulling all of the surface air down into the base of this rotating column. And that rotating column is allowing flaming combustion to last longer. It's sending so much energy vertically and requiring so much oxygen to feed the combustion that's happening in that mass, that it created these incredible fire-generated winds. And it's still the subject of some additional research and investigation, but yeah, quite something to behold. Here's another image. So these photos were taken by, there was a fellow up on the Jasper Tramway on the 24th. He was trying to get the Alberta emergency radio system, the AFRAC system, up and running again. We'd lost power to the community from the North Fire, and he was working on the generator backup. But this image shows actually quite well. You've got the rotating column. You've got the indrafts that run all the way up the skyline range from across the valley, and then up high, you can tell there's much faster winds moving forward over the top of the more stable valley air. Like, just huge amount of energy that's on display here. And the same fellow took a little clip. And what I'll just draw your eye to is, if you look at how fast the smoke is moving, that's like, okay, 100 meters, 200 meters, 300 meters. Like, we're talking going 100 meters in a second. It can't be that. It has to be slower than that, because like a 100 meters is a second is like 360 kilometers per hour. So I not thinking it was that, but massive amount of forces, and looking at the aftermath in the area where this column had been operating, you can see an incredible level of destruction from those fire generated indrafts. And so we're about to experience that that fire, because that was just before 4 p.m. and we would start to experience the fire in the community just before 6 p.m. And what had been set up in advance? Well, actually, an incredible amount in quite a short period of time. So in this image, which has a bunch of the details and spoilers of information, but it also does a good job of laying out what was prepared in advance. You have the high volume fire and flood 12-inch sprinkler line that runs immediately south of the community, and that's running along a roadway. And then there's a sprinkler line that's been set up around the entire west perimeter of town, that you saw in some of those earlier images. That goes all to here. All these little asterisks show where there's been sprinklers set up. The blue ones are ones that we had set up. The purple ones were ones that were recorded that had been already set up by homeowners that were turned on. And then there's relay tanks with additional water that's been set up, and other water systems in place. And then, as you saw, a bunch of work done to try and pull ember catching items away from structures. So trying to get an awful lot done in quite a short period of time. So if you give that the fire started at night on the 22nd, and that the primary objective there is get people safely evacuated, you have the 23rd and a good chunk of the 24th to prepare. So not long, and a lot was done by a lot of pretty incredible, dedicated and scared first responders dealing with a difficult task. This was the final ops briefing, where we ended up sending anyone who was not part of the operations to relocate to Hinton, and to give people the final directions before we were going to be impacted by those south fires. We had a lot of personnel in place by this time from different communities across Alberta. From Alberta Wildfire had sent us several unit crews and aircraft to assist. Parks Canada's my incident management team had arrived. Most of them had arrived by the night before. Some from all the way across the country, in the Maritimes even. And so quite a few resources, but given the scale of the fire, I hope you can appreciate that what most of us were concerned about was whether or not we'd be able to save anything. As those of you who are part of fire suppression on large-scale wildfire events know, when you have fire behavior that is in those upper scales where you can't do even regular indirect suppression, that there really is only one tool that can help with that kind of high intensity or extreme intensity wildfire event, and that's by using fire. And what we all like is if you can have ideal conditions to burn in advance under conditions that are more favorable to achieving your outcomes. But even as tactical ignition, where you're trying to nudge and influence these large um, wildfires, you can have some significant impacts. And even with the fire that I was showing you, that certainly seemed to be the case here. We got one of the most experienced ignition specialists in Canada on loan to us from BC via the Yukon, who was able to do like some very critical tactical ignition that helped us out by interrupting that large convective plume that was moving towards the community. And he started that with, you can see his ignition lines outlined on his flight trail map here. This is 1, 2, 3 on the lower slopes of Whistler, and then he got smoked out. So we stood up the fire column so that it would stop spotting as far ahead. Over on the east side of the valley, was able to get 2 more lines to guide the fire up higher on the slopes of Whistler, away from this valley bottom south of the community. And then he got 1 final line in most of the way up Signal before he described the experience in the helicopter as yeah, kind of a career defining moment of where the ignition spheres that he was using were bouncing all around in the aircraft, and it felt incredibly unsafe to be where they were, and that was the last work he was able to do before the wildfire. And just for those who maybe don't have ignition experience, wondering what the intent is, the intent is to break up that column so it doesn't continue to march with the same inertia right towards the community, and to pull things upslope. And then this final line on Signal is to nudge the fire into doing what it wants to do. Like I said, we shouldn't use words like control or manage on events like this. Influence, maybe have the fire do something that it's going to want to do, maybe a little sooner than it wants to do it, maybe in a slightly different area than it would normally go on its own. But these 2 measures managed to pull the fire away from the center part of the valley bottom, where we had done a significant amount of fuel reduction work. So it was able to be pretty effective. This is a number of things coming into alignment. And then this ignition line helps the fire move where the vectored winds from the West Valley and from the South Valley want to drive the fire. But instead of that happening out here, where the momentum from the South fires would have probably wanted to put it, it happened a little sooner than maybe the fire would have just evolved. So yeah, very difficult to say it's absolutely cause and effect, but I'm pretty confident that made a massive difference in what we were able to save the night of the 24th. So this is a couple dramatic images after we've received embers. This is when we had the edge of the column has kind of collapsed over the community. It's dropped embers on the west end. Things became dark. The lights are on. This image is from out near the Jasper Park Lodge, which is experiencing the same. These Whistler Mountain is right back here, just for reference, and this is the fire marching south of the west end of the community. And indeed, there's a lot of receptivity to that period of embers dropping. So we had some fires just to the west of the community up on the benchlands. So this is within about an hour. You've got a nice group torching event. But as you can see, like the slopes where we've done several passages of fuel thinning and removal, this reduces the fire behavior as it walks down slope to vigorous surface fire, even under these extreme conditions. And here's that perimeter sprinkler line. But that gives us the advantage that you can have direct suppression from crews. So that was good. Within the community, not the same result. There was a number of structures that had been ignited simultaneously, and by the same time, starting to overwhelm the municipal urban firefighting resources. Just another image. So this is, an hour and a quarter after the embers had dropped on the community. The fire is obviously quite vigorous. South of the community, you can see this is the high volume sprinkler line down south of the train tracks. Same here. And the fire, it does flank up towards that line, but fortunately we don't have head fire spread up towards that line. But as I said, things had started to deteriorate within the community. Multiple ignitions simultaneously. They start to put up, dark, toxic smoke that makes it hard to see where new starts might be happening from the embers that are getting cast from those structures, or things that might have been slower to take from the initial wildfire embers. You also start to see radiant heat spread structure to structure. So some pretty significant fire growth within urban fuels, and obviously not my area of expertise. I'm a wildland fire background, but this is consistent with what has happened in other communities that have experienced sort of that mass initial ignition and then having some catastrophic spread within certain blocks and subdivisions. This is about 10-15 minutes before we ended up pulling all the wildland fire personnel. While we felt safe from being in a structure that wasn't going to ignite, the air quality became such that none of the wildland fire crews had any kind of cartridge masks or self-contained breathing apparatus like urban firefighters are trained to use. So it became unreasonable to have those personnel there, and it was so hard to not stay, to be trying to be helpful, but in an environment that you just don't have the training to assist. But I just want to take a moment here to talk about the municipal crews, and I'm not going to speak to their operations because, like I said, it's not my area expertise. But both as a professional and from that personal side from the community, Hinton, Edson, Yellowhead County, Valemont, McBride, Quesnel, Clearwater, Wetaskiwin, Olds, Slave Lake, Wainwright, Whitecourt, Grand Prairie, Westlock, Woodlands, Ponoka, St. Albert, Edmonton sent a number of crews and resources. Vegreville, Vermilion River, Carstairs, Diamond Valley, Parkland County, Rocky Mountain House, High River, Colehurst, Beisker, Lac St. Anne, Beverly, Kananaskis, Strathmore, Lakeland County, Chestermere, Flagstaff. There was like 35 fire departments that would assist before about 7:30 the next morning, and incredible heroism, the work that they were doing, the conditions they were doing that work in, and so grateful for that assistance from these communities that, as I said, many of them were under evacuation alerts, and they sent their, like in many cases, their only Type 1 engine and their experienced fire personnel to come assist our communities. It's huge. I mentioned the sort of urban amber effect. I think this little video clip is a really great example of why that matters. You think of a patch of wildland fuels, and they'll flare and burn off in the space of minutes, and they'll be finished lobbing embers in that kind of a time frame. But structures, you can have an hour of large embers being tossed. And so this is an unusual situation where this is more of a classic wildland urban interface on the left, and you've got structures that are burning on the right, and the structures are actually lobbing embers into an unburned area of wildland interface. This is undoubtedly going to allow spread between different blocks, and certainly contributed to the results. So it wouldn't be a Landon presentation if I didn't talk about the wastewater treatment plant. An excellent lesson from investigations like what was done by former colleague Alan Westhaver and others in places like Fort McMurray, that really hammered home to me the important principle of that critical infrastructure protection. So a good thing to keep in mind is Jasper is a pretty remote community, and a fundamental human health thing that you need is the ability to deal with your sewage and gray water. And if you can't deal with that, how are you even going to support construction and reconstruction if you don't have the means to deal with that biohazard material? So one of the first places they got sprinklers the night of the 22nd was the wastewater treatment plant. So this plant took about 2 years to build. It needs to have the capability to deal with, as I said, 2.5 million visitors to Jasper. And you can't afford to wait to rebuild it. Even in half that amount of time, there would be no people coming back to the community and their homes and restarting tourism if you didn't have that basic essential service there to provide that for returning. So this had a number of crews. As you can see, they had to be pretty busy and diligent. This is early times of sort of defending, and they ended up defending it all night. This is another image post fire, but you can see the fire had moved all the way around that facility, and it wasn't for lack of trying on the fire's part that it didn't burn, but we had excellent defense all throughout the night and into the next day. And in the end, we did suffer a bunch of devastating loss in the community. You have this is the West End neighborhood. This is a portion of kind of the central manufactured home area, and then some of these other blocks where there was significant losses. And that is represented on the map with the black icons, our structural losses. And then we had some pretty remarkable saves. As you can see, the fire was moving quite rapidly across these flats south of this is Lake Edith, and this is Lake Annette, and this is Lac Beauvert, and this is the Jasper Park Lodge lease. And the fire is moving sort of directly, almost like connecting these lakes. So the lakes and the extensive wildfire risk reduction work around structures near these lakes. Both worked well together to restrict some of the spread. So as the fire spread, you'd have like a protective eddy effect from the different lakes, and that's how you end up with less impact within that area. And there was some creep in with the flanking fire spread, but pretty remarkable and a great demonstration of working with both like the natural features and with a lot of preparation in advance. And again, I'll invoke like Greg Van Diegem's name and Alan Westhaver's name for leading a lot of this work, and folks like Dave Smith pounding various podiums, trying to convince people to take a lot of personal responsibility on their leases and properties, and it did make a difference. And so after the fact, where you have time to put together some of the information, and we've certainly had some excellent assistance with that, primarily from CFS and their wildland fire specialist group. But here's the progression from cooler to hotter with the fire spread. You can see that only this little lobe, this little red band, tiny bit to the north, and a tiny bit on the north fire. After the night of the 24th, where we did receive about 15 millimeters of rain, fortunately, the night of the 24th, there was only a few small little growth pulses on this wildfire event, but most of it happened from in kind of a 49 hour duration, and that meant that from the time the lightning strike started to when we experienced embers on the west end of the community was about 47 hours. And the fire was unusually severe for a large wildfire event. This is a fire severity map, again with the cooler to warmer colors. And I'll just point out, like there's slightly lower severity compared to the primarily extreme severity that you see throughout most of the fire. This little band, I'll just draw your attention to, that was where the fire had reached the night of the 23rd, and then by about midnight, it had dropped out of the canopy and just surface burned underneath. So you can see the progression overnight to when it picked up again on sort of late morning, noonish on the 24th on the other band. And this is indeed, it's still sort of intact forest canopy, that little band. But for the most part, and close to 90% of the fire is high to extreme severity. Well, it'd be nice if everything was all done just after the 24th. You take 15 mils of rain, and then everybody can just pack up and go home. And obviously, that is not the case. This scan on the right-hand side is on, I think it was on the night of the 27th or night of the 26th, but a few days later. These are all hotspots that are still there even after several days of suppression. The hotspots in the community are like, there's no open flame. There wasn't really open flame after by about 8 a.m. the morning of the 25th. But still a lot of residual heat, obviously, and a significant amount of work to do, especially along this north and west side of the community where the fire hadn't burned, and we still had 2/3 of the community unaffected, and we wanted to keep it that way. But a lot of work even just here, and this is just a tiny little part of the fire. This scan band on the left-hand side is the north fire perimeter that we were actioning, anchored by the Athabasca River. But this is closer to August, And you can see like this is a distance of about 15 kilometers when you smooth it out in GIS, but like on the ground, it's like 30, 40 kilometers of convoluted fire line that we're trying to suppress, because obviously you don't want this north fire to be able to activate under a north push and come down towards the north end of the community and undo all of the work that you've endured so far. And so, you know, this is where really want to salute the incredible work done by wildland firefighters. You know, whether it was doing indirect, Bray, I wish we had more opportunities for this, because it's a heck of a lot easier than the slow grind of hundreds and hundreds of kilometers in incredibly rugged mountainous terrain that all of the fire crews labored for the next. Well, it was August 16th, we were able to secure things enough to have folks return to the community. And it was because people gave it everything they had. They were really invested in getting people back home, and so appreciated. And that brings us to the hardest part of fire, hardest part of my career. Morgan Kitchen, who died while doing exactly what I was talking about, giving everything in this case to try and help people get back home. And there's only so much I can say on this, but think about Morgan every day. Think about what we can learn from this fire, what we can learn as agencies, what we can do to change outcomes. All right, back to post-fire and some of the things that resulted. So I've got this image in because at about 2 in the afternoon, where I was showing those images of the incredible energy under the convective columns on the wildfire, where you had that circulating plume or column of energy going skyward. That is basically what you're seeing here on the right. And interestingly, as it was burning towards the community along the west side of the valley, ripping out trees, by the way, I did a few little spot ring counts on some of the large Douglas fir that had been torn out by the roots out of like good anchoring rocky glacial till. Those Doug firs were like 260, 270 years old. They match up with Tandy's fire history research that showed like about 3 large wildfire events ago in the main valley, like mid 1700s, the whole valley had burned, and then it burned early 1800s, and then it burned at late 1800s, and then now again 2024 it burned. But the fires probably reset everything in the mid 1700s, because that's the origin of most of the big Doug firs. But they've survived since then, 2 other valley clearing fire events. Indeed, like the 1889 event, like dwarfs a fire like this. This is measured at just over 32,000 hectares. But 1889, it was estimated that it might have affected 60% of the park's forests. This fire was only 5% of Jasper's forest, so massive scale difference. But this one was destructive in a way that previous fires hadn't been at that scale. And and that those fire generated winds on this kind of shadier, moister side of the valley, yeah, very, very interesting. And the pattern of trees that got pulled out, you can kind of track the progression of the center of that column looking at the trees. They all got ripped out of the ground before they burn, because they point towards where the column was advancing from. And then interestingly, on the slopes of Signal, the trees are bent over in the direction the fire was. And then I'll just point out this nice green edge. So this road is the Marmoset Basin access road. And up in the very upper left corner, you can just see part of the leasehold for Marmoset Basin. And on the right image, this is the start of the Marmoset Basin access road. But it was one of the more frequent questions I got asked for the first couple of months, was like, how did marmot survive? And really, how marmot survived, you can see the path of, I gotta go back. The path of that column down here, which is this. It's 8 kilometers long, and at its widest point, it's like 2 kilometers wide. And that column steered the entire fire. It took control of the entire fire in the valley. You can see it in those other images with those indrafts getting pulled even off the skyline on the far side of the valley. And so here, it was overriding the natural fire progression, which would have been upslope and towards Marmoset. Like at its closest point, it's like 250 meters away, but it wasn't able to advance because the downward tug was so violent towards that central column. So the violence of that convective plume actually generated a great deal of control, and was responsible for the fire not being able to continue to ride as an upward spreading crown fire through the Marmoset Basin lease. And then, you know, some of the other things that certainly were striking about this fire with respect to some of those extreme fire generated winds, you know, heat examples of the incredible energy release and the heat released with these glacial erratics that split open under the heat. And then this image of the north end of Wabasso campground. Some of you would have heard about or saw a little Parscana video clip of the construction bin, the sort of 3,000 kilogram construction bin that was right here. It was there to get like old ash cleaned out of fire pits by the campground cleaners. It got lifted up and tossed, because I found parts of it over here between this road and the campground. It got tossed over 200 meters through the air into the Athabasca River. And then bear-proof garbage bins bolted to concrete slabs got ripped out of the ground and tossed on the side of the river. These fire grates are some of the most surprising. These are like 100 pounds of super thick iron that are embedded in the ground. They got plucked out of these campsites, and I found them like all around the campground. So not in a, you know, just a simple pattern, but like radially kind of dropped. This one dropped across the river, so carried 300 meters or more, and dropped from such an elevation that it pancaked and has the shape now that you see. So yeah, incredible forces. And you know, the fire effect, yeah, it was just to me like this is also part of the story, and I can get pulled just into the fire ecology. But yeah, there's questions sort of that post-fire event of like, so what's happened with the town? Well, a huge amount of work that's gone into allowing people to move forward with insurance and rebuilding and soil testing to be able to build in a safe, clean site. And in the meantime, interim housing. This is near our Whistler campground. That's the largest sort of interim housing location. This is to the north of the community of Jasper, and yeah, still going on, still a big challenge, but it has allowed us to, like, we were able to welcome visitors back with good success this season. It does put shelter in place for people, and allow the reconstruction to continue. But certainly don't want to make light of just how hard it's been, and how many new challenges have come up for everyone to try and make sure that it happens safely and well, and that people are able to get back home again. This is just kind of an interesting one. So, a Google Earth image of pre-fire. This is the fifth lake in the Valley of Five, just south of the community. And this is a LiDAR scan. We did a LiDAR scan of the valley for geotechnical. We had concerns about landslides over some of our roadways, but able to make use of that data, obviously, and certainly future researchers will be able to make use of that data as well. But this is that band that I earlier pointed out to folks, of where the fire dropped just before midnight on the 23rd out of the canopy, and then smoldered underneath, and then picked up again to the north, and started spreading again with quite severe fire effects when you look at the level of fuel removal. Mountain pine beetle, which would feel like elephant in the room if it didn't get mentioned. As most know, just like large parts of Alberta and huge parts of British Columbia, probably 60% of the forest in Jasper had some degree of mountain pine beetle effect, because a lot of our forests are pine or pine dominated, and it's certainly affected fuels. This sort of image is taken probably about 4 or 5 years after infestation by the beetle. Our forests had sort of hit peak beetle infestation around 2015, 2016, which is quite lucky. It meant that most of the volatile, really light fuels had dropped out of the canopy, and in some places potentially even provided additional canopy spacing. But this is worth addressing and worth looking at, and by no means am I drawing conclusions here, but I just wanted to provide, since this is a fire science group, provide some additional information, and just something to look at and think about. So these two map images, this is again that fire severity map. The triangles are the fire ignition locations, the best estimates for the lightning, and quite accurate for the one that was near the transfer station. And then the black colors are mountain pine beetle mortality that was really severe, so greater than 65%. And then the dark gray is 36 to 65, and then light gray is less than 35%. And then the pink is where it's not considered a significant contributor to the fuel composition. And I'll just note, the most severely affected part of the forest, most severely affected by mountain pine beetle, actually quite well matches the lowest severity area throughout the bulk of the fire. There's certainly little patches that are lower severity, but I just find it quite telling that matches more with kind of the moderate and high, while so much of the other areas are more extreme. It's that's just a visual, and there's there's likely good reasons for that. So I'm not giving you like a definitive, I'm just giving you my guesses on that. And I think it's related to two things. One, that canopy spacing is certainly helpful, but also you look at where the ignitions are. This was primarily burned through flanking and backing fire because the winds primarily track this way, whereas all the rest of this was subjected to head fire. So, you know, two quite understandable reasons of why, yeah, mountain pine beetle severity does not correspond necessarily with fire severity. And the reason why this comes up is because many people usually who don't have a lot of experience with fire or have really strong feelings about, you know, about wanting to simplify things. As we know in fire, things are rarely so simple and straightforward. Might want to just say like, well, of course, the Jasper fire happened because of mountain pine beetle. You know, just looking at that relationship a little more closely, and had a friend and former colleague point out, like, you should just do a simple chi-squared test looking at, we have a very recent vegetation resource inventory that was done for Jasper National Park because we had experienced this mountain pine beetle change, and we wanted to examine sort of the changes to fuel as well as some of the ecological implications. And so looking at all of those different polygons and doing a comparison of both the fire severity and mountain pine beetle severity, and just looking at what are the relationships and what you'd like to see for those who aren't, you know, familiar with the diagram, you would either like to see a strong negative or a strong positive relationship that corresponds to the severities. And that would mean you've got all your hot colors in one corner, and or at least a trend of hot. And as you can see, just even examining, you know, a strong negative association, strong positive association, very weak positive associations on extreme severity throughout all the different levels of mountain pine beetle. You know, not even great through the edge of the low severity or the light. There just isn't like there's not a smoking gun association. What I will say is, like, it undoubtedly was part of the Jasper fire story. At the very least, the fuel consumption of dead, cured, standing pine logs, you know, contributed to fire intensity. Mathematically, it absolutely contributes to fire intensity calculations. But in terms of it being a smoking gun and obvious, just like so many things where, you know, somebody tells you there's a super simple explanation, and obviously it was this, obviously it was that. I think, like most things in nature, it's a more complex story. And I would say mountain pine beetle, it's a stretch to say that it was the leading character in the Jasper fire. I think it was a supporting character, if you're going to characterize it like that. But absolutely worth additional investigation and more scrutiny. This is just early peeks at that kind of information. What do I think is the primary reason that Jasper wildfire happened in 2024? Well, the same reason why we had the fires that we did in 2017, and why we had the fire season that we did in 2021 in BC. I helped on the Landon complex. I think everybody who's on this call probably helped in 2023 on one of the various fire complexes across the country, because it hit us coast to coast. You know, in Jasper, at this latitude, up in the mountains, to get temperatures above 40 degrees, that should not be happening. And anyone who's involved in fire operations knows that, like, the last 10 years, especially the last 5 years, it is feeling like things are getting a lot harder to keep people safe and to have success with these complex events. So, I think that is like a definite explanatory variable. It's also the one that's going to be the most challenging for us to address collectively as societies. And you get the combination of extreme fire events, and then you get some of these significant storms moving through, and even a place that's historically been quite a lightning shadow, it's going to get some of these significant storms affecting us when we're receptive. And I think that's going to be the case in Story for all areas within forested regions of Canada. It feels like our work is getting a lot harder. And I'd like to think, I've been saying to many that I'd like to think that we are getting a little bit better at doing fire management, fire suppression, fire preparedness, all of those elements. And I think we are. I don't think we're matching the pace of how much harder things have been getting. I think things have been getting harder at like an exponential scale, and I think we've been getting better at only a linear scale. So, what can we do? So I'm not sure if folks are aware, but Jasper is a place that, thanks to I mentioned a bunch of folks that I feel incredibly indebted to, that I've had the pleasure of working with, Dave Smith and Alan Westhaver and Greg Van Tighem. They got started early. They got started 2003 doing a bunch of landscape level treatments of promoting FireSmart messages for leaseholders and property owners, and trying to prepare for difficult events. I think even back then, probably nobody was thinking that we would see some of the behaviors that we have experienced most recently, but it was ambitious, and it was it was new, and thank crikey that they did get after it, because it needs a bunch of time to do work. So Jasper is only 200 hectares big, but there's been close to like 10 times that amount of area treated. And the risk models that we commissioned with the Canadian Forest Service, Chris Stockdale and Brett were great about helping us put together for several of our parks that have communities in them. It easily identified that one of our most significant areas of risk is west of the community. We've done a lot of work there. We've done more since this is taken. We're doing a bunch more this winter. But fuel, like, that's the one that everybody looks at and thinks like, oh yeah, we got to do fuel management. And yes, you do. But what I want to emphasize critically, and certainly one of the lessons from this event, is fuel is just one vulnerability. It's again jumping at the easy answer. Yes, it's going to be part of the solution, but no, it doesn't change things. So, while I might quibble with the category, or I'd like to wordsmith some of the 7 FireSmart disciplines, I think it does a good job of capturing kind of a scope of what we want to accomplish at a whole bunch of levels. And some of these are not necessarily the most exciting things for folks that are used to being more operational with fire, but we need a bunch of that expertise to feed into. I would say this is going to be one of the most important ones, dealing with vulnerabilities and dealing with resiliency. And it's more expensive, but we got to get in there, and we need to be working on making our communities, our structures, and especially our critical infrastructure resilient to whatever kinds of natural disasters. Like, it doesn't have to just be wildfire. We can think of lots of places that have other natural disasters that we need to have be resilient for these large wildfire events. And then all of these elements end up being important. What I like is the vegetation management, even though it's what people always think of first, it's only one component. And there's so many other elements to be thinking about. So I really want to hammer that, and my good friend Christine, she'll probably buy me a latte for making sure that I threw this slide on, but that's sort of the next step, and it's the best money investment we can make. And then, yeah, pretty heavy presentation because there's some significant events, and it was an obvious tragic outcome in the community of Jasper. But nature-wise, this was an extreme wildfire event, which has happened before. And these are ecosystems that evolved with fire and indeed had fire. And again, another theme that it's both encouraging and a little disappointing. I've heard it start to be said more and more of like, well, 150 years of mismanagement in Western Canada. And of course, this is what we've got. And it's like, well, we all contributed to that because people didn't want to be breathing smoke, or they were rightfully concerned about threats of wildfire happening from things that start as prescribed fires. And it's certainly not easy work to be reintroducing fire to these ecosystems to help with future resiliency. But it's also not going to be done in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years. If we spend 150 years digging into this problem, then we should probably be planning, at least a reasonable time period. Maybe 25 years is our ambitious goal of trying to work towards that wildfire resiliency. I think the steps that are being made, and that a lot of our partners, Lori Daniels' lab, I think has embraced a great moniker of living with wildfire and approaching wildfire in a way that it becomes a more accepted part of the landscape is the direction we have to go, but also giving us some grace to be able to implement change sort of reasonably and over a period of time, that it's not going to be undone after changing things. And then why I like to end with this big fella is sort of that there's a poem about, nature doesn't feel sorry for itself. And you look at this guy, and if you look closely at his antlers, at the base of his antlers, and they are badly burned, which I can only think, given that he still has a coat of fur there, that he was in the water, and his antlers were sticking up out of the water for those burns to have happened and for him to have not sustained damage. And wildlife are a great example of just carrying on and accepting change and moving forward. And I think we can accept that things have changed and still move forward and still do better and still work towards better outcomes. That's an awful lot of Landon talking. Everybody's been patient, probably because Karen's had you muted. But yeah, thanks, folks. And if I haven't used up all the time, but I probably did, we could probably go to questions.
Landon, that was so great. Thank you. And I'm going to apologize because I did let you talk through all of the time, but you were telling such a great story and laying out a timeline so well, and with some really, really sage words, I think, for all communities and everyone working in this sphere, and some good advice, I think, to give grace to ourselves as well. So I did let you continue. I'm not sure what your availability is, Landon. Are you comfortable to stay around for a couple minutes extra? We'll try to hit a few of the questions. Okay. So if the audience, if you're able to stay on, please do. If you can't, I apologize. We'll do our best to get through this as quickly as we can. Thank you for holding on as long as you did. I have 5 pages of notes, but I'm going to just focus on the audience's questions first. But before I dig into that, I just wanted to echo some of your words, Landon, about the people involved and all of the people and the sacrifices given, not like Morgan's sacrifice, but also a lot of people had to leave their families, their homes, their communities. And it's, you know, we think of the structural firefighters, the wildland firefighters, instant command teams, but there's so much behind the scenes as well. There's, you know, the dispatchers, people on radio, cooks, truck drivers, the list goes on and on. So I just want to echo your thank you. And not just on this event, but on all those events. It takes a true community to be able to do this work. So
Thanks, Karen. Well
and
said.
you give yourself credit as well, because oh, this was a doozy. Okay, I'm going to dig into the questions here. So sorry, bear with me here. People are posting in the chat and it keeps bumping me down. There was a question about the indraft. So you showed some images at the beginning with about a 5-kilometer indraft, just really hauling into that plume. And there were some questions around, could that provide opportunity for aerial ignition? And I think you talked about this a little, but if you could just maybe wrap in how you can take advantage of those kinds of conditions and how I believe they were taken advantage of by the ignition specialist on site.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great point. You do make use of that in draft, and sometimes the goal with ignition is to create your own column to create that level of control and in draft when you're doing ignition on large wildfire events. In this case, you've already got an established column so that you can do ignition that can gently nudge. Like I don't like to use absolute terms like steer, or because it implies a level of control that is a little bit presumptuous on events and forces like this. But you can nudge it in different directions by doing ignition. And so indeed, that is what, when we got an ignition specialist on the incident, that was what the focus was trying to steer that column to move upslope. And so the first ignition line actually did that. And you can see this dramatic change on the mountain slope on Whistler Mountain, where it changes from, you've got that nice clean green line of where it's burned up to the edge, but the fire is being pulled down slope towards the column. And then where the first ignition line was done, the fire runs all the way up the slope, like basically right to the lichen and interrupts that column. So you can interfere with the column, you can steer a column, you can it's providing a certain level of certainty and control. So a column it can be a good thing, but when it's generating winds in some places calculated to be 200 kilometers per hour or potentially more, you don't want that. You don't want that running into values at risk and structures either. So yeah, I don't know if that answered the question or if it.
No, that's great. And it ties into the next question here, which was asking about, rumors or reports of winds upwards of 100 kilometers an hour throughout the valley, theories around the fire-induced tornadic activity and things like that. Atusa gave a fairly large response in the chat box, and I see she has her hand up. If you're okay, I'll ask her to unmute and she can ask her questions. I'm guessing it's in regards to this. So if you'd like to unmute. Atusa. And just so that you're aware, you will be on the recording if you choose to unmute.
Hello, London.
Hello.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed every moment of it, especially the video on the smoke. And you mentioned it can't be 100 meters. Average speed of mid-atmosphere updraft is around 5 centimeter, not even meter per second. When thunderstorm is happening in the CB, 50 meters per second is average. But when wildfire is happening, unfortunately we can't measure it. We don't have proof to say it, but in the models, we estimated it's above 100 meter per second. So it's more than even a supercell or just I'm talking about vertical motion. So it's above whatever nature can produce. Your estimate is correct, so don't doubt it. The question,
Wow.
the question I have for you is, would it be useful if, like, you knew 6 hours or 10 hours in advance that plume is going to happen in that location?
You know, it's an interesting question, Tusa, and I've like any fire practitioner, and I'm sure even fire practitioners not on the Jasper incident have probably asked themselves, well, what would I have done differently? Because certainly we all would have liked an even better outcome. I've ended up, you know, being at peace with the idea that given what I thought was going to happen, which was the total loss of the community and all our critical infrastructure, I was amazed and so proud and impressed of everyone's efforts to be able to do what we did and accomplish what we did. But I do think about, like, well, so could we have changed trajectory? Could we have altered things? Could we have broken up that convective column? And, you know, all of those what ifs make me kind of recognize that probably it would have meant burning up Marmoset Basin if that had been interfered with in the wrong way, that column, and that would have been quite catastrophic to the community of Jasper. It might have advanced the fire in a different way. So it's yeah, could have done some change, could have done some influence. Would it have been helpful to know they were gonna? I think absolutely. You always feel better by having a sense of whether or not you're going to meet conditions that are going to produce much more rapid growth. So that absolutely would have helped us kind of prepare more. Like the standard models were not giving that rapid rate of spread projections. So yeah,
Correct.
that was a long
Correct.
answer just to say yes.
Well,
Yes,
and
it'd be good to know in advance.
that's why I was hoping to receive the answer, because we don't have any model right now operationally. We have in the science is developed many times. It's not first time, but we don't have any operational fire forecasting model which coupled with the atmosphere, which can see that kind of development of the plume and the vertical motion, rapid, fast movement of the wind, which basically we call it fire weather, which fire producing weather, not weather producing, it's wind. So I
Yeah.
hope that's, I didn't see it in your last slide of development. I'm super glad you mentioned it's not all fuel. There are more parameters to look at, and I hope one day we get to that and operational development to give that utility for firefighter to see what's gonna happen. The same thing which we have it right now. We don't have very good thunderstorm forecasting, but we still have enough good forecast to see it is coming next day or in a week.
Well, Tusa, maybe I'll just throw out there as a final point that yeah, in the next couple weeks, it'd be great for you to reach out and maybe some of the data that we've collected can be helpful for advancing models and understanding of that phenomena.
I'm more than happy if I can be in any assistance. Thanks again for all good work you guys are doing. I can't even imagine being in your shoes. And thanks for beautiful presentation and very complete material you're providing. Thank you.
Thanks, Tusa.
Thank you, both of you, for that great discussion. And Yeah, I think it raised some really good questions. And in my mind, I guess at the heart of it, I come down to it too, is we can have the predictive tools and we can have the computer models and everything, but at the heart of it, it's still people. And it's people on the ground and people in the air. And I think when you have a situation like you did with the Jasper Complex or with the Fort McMurray fire or so many of these other large events, we can what if ourselves to death, but regardless of the different information you have, it might not change the ability to put people safely to be able to do different things. So just something to keep in mind as well. But so yeah, there was a question if there was any information available on things like maximum spotting distance documented from the fire. Landon, did you freeze?
Oh, sorry. No, I just missed the last there.
Oh,
Karen.
okay, sorry. I might have cut out there. There was a question as to whether or not you could, or if you had any information on a documented maximum spotting distance from this fires.
No, we don't have anything formal. On the first night, so the 22nd, I actually did the initial fire reports on the 3 lightning starts. So I was down there and observed 500-meter spotting. But yeah, the day of the 24th, surface winds were not that strong, and most of that most of the transport of the embers was vertical until right towards yeah, just before 6 o'clock, when what our best hypothesis of what happened is that we had the column that had been pulled around onto the north side of Whistler collapsed and dropped embers onto the primarily land south of the community, but a portion of it, just the edge of it, hit the west side of the community and obviously had significant impact, even though it wasn't even the full brunt of that column collapse. And that would have been up to like a 2-kilometer distance from that event. But the regular movement spotting, the only number that I'm aware of was, yeah, that initial windiest day, which was the 22nd when they started, and 500-meter spotting.
Thank you, Landon. Okay, so you showed 2 maps side by side looking at mountain pine beetle effect and then also looking at fire severity. And there's a question here. It's more of a curiosity, I think, but do you think, knowing this is very preliminary stuff as well, so could those maps be a bit of an artifact based on how we calculate DMBR?
Yeah, and you know, like pretty broad and crude categories that don't account for, you know, a bunch of the detail that obviously does have impacts. And then, you know, you can look at some of the statistical flaws of looking at that. Like there's a lot of spatial autocorrelation dealing with those different polygons. Those are not independent samples, so it's like lots and lots of things. But just what it should sort of point out is that there isn't like a obvious smoking gun simple explanation is what I think we can mostly glean from it. But yeah, it feels like there is probably more to that story, and we did get some excellent data. So part of that is like a putting out a carrot that it could warrant some further investigation, and that it's interesting to try and understand it better. So yeah, again, not really an answer, but yeah, an acknowledgement that it's an interesting challenge to try and figure out what the various impacts there were. And just one other like interesting anecdote on that fuels perspective. In our caribou breeding facility that got affected by the fire, we had removed every dead mountain pine beetle tree from that area, and and that area is down in that sort of more moderate to highly affected bottom southwest corner of the fire. And within that facility, we had pretty much 100% of our green tree cover that had been left was burned and killed. Whereas just outside the facility, where there was standing gray trees and standing green trees, it seemed like the fire effects were lower. And within that facility, there's a network of different fencing roads and trails. So it's like a spider web of fire guards within that facility. And it only experienced flanking and backing fire. And yet we had more crown removal of fuels, burned fuels and trees that were experienced fire mortality than we had just outside. Just as a visual comparison, this isn't based on plots and sampling, but that's interesting. And maybe it relates to, you open up the canopy, it becomes drier, you get more airflow. It's that kind of the downside of doing forest thinning and removing tree cover. If you've got a good healthy canopy, especially in wetter forest types, say in parts of BC, then you likely don't want to remove that canopy because it probably maintains a certain amount of moisture that you're making things more vulnerable by removing them. So different solutions for different locations, even within a drier belt like Jasper. So
I think it just draws back to how complex all of this is. And it's not even, you talked about, a leading role and supporting roles, but even those are convoluted and interwoven. And they cannot be teased apart at the heart of it, right? So,
totally.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask you one more question, and I'm going to be really unfair and kind of tie two questions into one. So if you need me to repeat it or remind you partway through, please do not hesitate. But fire refugia kept coming up in my mind during your presentation, especially looking at the severity maps. And so I guess the first part of the question has to do with, what do you think there are available for fire refugia for the South Fire in particular? And then there's a question in the chat that I think ties into this a bit. And has there been much thought from parks about maintaining the valley that's burnt as more of an open grass or fir land cover to change future burn potential?
Well, the second one is easier, and I'll be uncharacteristically fast. Yes, and even within the next 5 years, while we can treat sort of larger areas with prescribed fire with light fuels to maintain that sort of forest dynamic. And then refugia, which is kind of tied into it a little bit, like what is coming back when you have that severe a wildfire, especially in certain areas. And really, you've got the primary cover is coming back from deep-rooted species. So you're getting root systems that are sending up aspen suckers, or you're getting shrubs that are able to resprout from that sort of root mass, and you're getting deeper rooted graminoids. So some of the grasses like hairy wild rye is doing really well, and asters are doing well, and birch leaf spirea and rose and things like that. But a bunch of the diversity probably lost in the severe areas, especially over those large expanses. Now, like that, probably characteristic of extreme wildfire events that would have historically occurred. But it's, what we're more familiar with, and my understanding is that most of these large wildfire events, you get only about 60% of the fires affected by extreme severity, and then you would have more of those points of refugia. And what I noticed was some of the Douglas fir, that sort of close to 300-year-old Douglas fir, they were located on like open slopes and didn't burn. So they still have fuels in their canopy. They weren't subjected to crown fire because they were isolated by location. They're still dead. They're dead because the radiant heat being released by this fire was phenomenal. And that's something that I think the CFS report will articulate well, is just what kinds of intensities this fire was generating. But it was causing radiant heat mortality of of areas that weren't even getting significantly burned. So I'm hopeful that some of those areas, even though they'll show up as high severity, they will hopefully still be harboring a bunch of seed bank and species diversity that'll be able to move out on that sort of like island kind of context of reestablishing across the landscape. And certainly there are little wet pockets and so forth. But in many ways, you know, we've been wishing that we did have a resurgence, especially in the valley bottom, of some of our aspen stands, just for providing different habitat kind of variety and sort of less acidic soils and certain suites of species that are dependent on those ecosystems. And those have kind of diminished significantly in the last century as conifers have had their heyday with various fire exclusion policies. So yeah, I think it'll be, you know, a good thing eventually for our diversity, even with the severity we experienced, if I'm driving in the right direction of your question there, Karen. But it may take longer than we're used to seeing from fires, even in the last, you know, 20 years ago, that wouldn't have been this severe over this much extent.
Thanks, Landon. Yeah, it sounds like succession is well underway. And that's not a bad thing that it takes a bit of time for those conifers to come back too. I think that's a natural process, right? To see those early successional species first. And I guess we just all have to wait and see what ends up happening. But okay, we kept you for an extra 20 minutes, so I'm going to wrap it up here. If anyone had questions that we didn't get to or that come to you after the fact, you can send them in to us at wildfire@ualberta.ca. I will put it in the chat box, and we can kind of maybe pass those off to you, Landon, and see if you're interested in answering some of those after. Those who stuck around, thank you so much. And thank you, Landon, for sharing. This is, I think, a lot of these scenarios or circumstances where events like the Jasper Complex happen are hard to talk about for the people involved, and maybe they don't get the most patience or understanding from the general public. And so I appreciate you coming and speaking openly about this, because we need to talk about this so we can learn. At the end of the day, we're going to learn a lot of lessons, good and bad, from this, just like every other event in the past. So thank you for coming and being so open and setting up such an amazing walkthrough of the events leading up to and after this fire.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, no, great to be able to speak on behalf of, like, obviously so many people worked on this event. A bunch of them are in the chat and the virtual audience out there. Some incredible work done by so many people for so long. And yeah, Jasper definitely felt the love from the whole country. At times felt like from the planet, in terms of support and wanting us to do well. So yeah, thanks. And thanks for the very kind words, folks, that I'm just now seeing popping up in the chat. That's appreciated too.
And you wouldn't have been able to see it, Landon, but numerous times during your presentation, you had hearts and clapping and thumbs up and so much support from this group. So yeah, very well done. Thank you. And have a wonderful weekend, everyone. And thanks for joining us. We'll be back in November. I don't have a set topic that I'm allowed to say yet, but it's going to be a good one. So stand by for an email from us and we'll send that out shortly. Thanks, Landon. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.